Welcome to the Uber Cordero show for this week. And today, I hope you guys are doing very well. I have something hot, I got something exciting for you. And today, what we want to talk about is family dynamics of the Obama family. We're tracing it way back from Kenya into the American space and the complexities of their life. And the reason I want to bring this topic is because their family history is very interesting and full of turns and twists that are fascinating, even 80 years after President Barack Obama left office. So, within the context of this lecture, is to explore the complexity of Black masculinity, or Black manhood, as represented in the family history, and we're going to use different narratives of the Obama family, mostly the males, the more pronounced males in the family, which is, I realize, is an incomplete exploration of the family dynamics, but that's what we have because all of the males, the four of the brothers have written autobiographies, and there's also an extensive biographical sketch done by Solly Jacobs on the father, Barack Obama Sr. So from these sources, we have really enough evidence to tell a story about this family, which I think is fascinating to explore, and that's what I will do. One of the things about this family is that it's very multi-ethnic, it's multinational, multiracial as well. And because of that, it gives us really interesting things to work with as regards to issues about identity and power and social mobility, and things that many scholars of migrant perspective and race are interested in about. Um, but it's also about a story about Black experiences and solidarity and differences. And in order to follow this conversation, I want you to stay with me, and you will not be seeing me on the camera because I'm going to be sharing my screen, but I will be having my voice speaking so you can hear me as I go through the presentation on the side. So I want to start with the Barack Obama Sr. because his story is really interesting. He is kind of like the connector of the family, um, because he is a main patriarch from which the family stories emerge from. And he connects both the continental African Blackness or Black experience with the American Black experience. So how does he do this? He he comes of age in the colonial at the end of the colonial British colonial rule in Kenyan colony, and he grows up in Western Kenya as a member of the Luo-speaking people next to Lake Victoria, present-day Kisumu City. He is kind of married to four wives, each time monogamous, but he's a serial monogamous, which means he is married to different women at different time, but in total, four wives in total, including his girlfriend. Um, he's a very troubled person, but very interesting as well to explore. And his life gives us a lot to talk about with regards to the family. But what is really interesting about this guy is how his life comes to represent the struggles which combine the civil rights movement in the United States, which is led by Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and a slew of other people concerned about Black rights, not only in the United States, but also in Africa through decolonization. So as this movement takes hold, and there's kind of like an awareness that African countries are going to be independent, there's an awakening that there needs to be a literati class, the educated class. And so airlift program is initiated, led by some liberals in the United States, but also the Black church, who contribute a lot of money to bring uh, young men to the American space to study. And that's how That's how Barack Obama Sr. gets into the United States through the airlift program funded by a whole host of actors, including J.F. Kennedy, uh, Martin Luther King, and a Kenyan independent movement leader called Thomas Mboya. So from Barack Obama, here we see this fusion of the experiences of Black people through decolonization and civil rights movements coming together. And it comes together in a big way. That's why the family story is really fascinating to explore. Now, Barack Obama's senior story wasn't really investigated much, apart from snippets that were written in Dreams from My Father that we will talk about later on. But the Sally Jacob, an American journalist from Boston who wrote for the Boston Globe, took up this task of investigating the background of this guy whose son was now running to be America's first president. And the story written here about him it was kind of it kind of paints a little negative picture about the past, the character Obama, but so the family didn't really receive it very well, but it does give us very careful analysis of his life, starting from his grandfather, um, and then to his father, Hussein Obama, then the man, and the troubled relationship and trauma of single parenthood and the humiliation of living in a colonial space. And he was just a very intelligent guy, very charismatic, but also arrogant and without discipline. So at some point, he ends up dropping out of schools and is passed by his peers, and then he has an awakening, which is the desire to come to the United States. He does end up coming to the United States at the University of Hawaii, and where he meets Anne Dunham, President of Barack Obama's mother, and shortly after Barack Obama is born in Hawaii. And then he proceeds on to Harvard to pursue a doctorate degree in economics, drops out, goes back to Kenya, and his life kind of takes a wrong turn because he's eaten up by post-colonial realities that make the acquisition of his dreams impossible. So, because of the challenges that he faces, he's therefore not present for his children, and he is unable to keep a marriage for a long time, which exposes his children to different types of trauma and different types of experiences that I highlighted in the memoirs and autobiographies that they write about themselves. So stay with me so you follow that logic. Um, the first one that's published in 1995 is written by Harvard student at the time, Barack Obama, who was president of the Harvard Review and was tasked to write a story about race. And he decided to write about his family history. So this is where dreams come from. It comes from Obama's fascination with race as a student at Harvard. So he goes into deep dive about his family story. And in it, he kind of tells a story about navigating the American space while Black and mixed race at the same time, but also having a foreign identity that he hardly knows about. So he does get into this um, pursuit of Blackness and pursuit of his African heritage that thrust him into the political scene in the late 90s and early 2000s. So Barack is named after his father, um, and his mother is Anne Dunham, like I said. Uh, he has fuzzy memory of his father because they only met once uh, after he was a toddler. And he has very limited connection with Kenya, except for the visits and from stories told about his family from his grandfather. So growing up, he has this fetish view about his father, and the fetishes about Africa from his grandparents that he grows up with, which include things like his extreme intelligence, his dressing abilities, his bombastic personalities, and hardly any negative thoughts, because the parents, his grandparents, did not want him to know the full story because they wanted to preserve his integrity uh, and to have a good view about his background. So then he gets into figuring out who he is really through finding other Black elders within Hawaiian community that introduces him to American Blackness, because Hawaii is multiracial. There were hardly any Black people there. So he read a lot about Blackness, but he just never experiences. His contact with Blackness comes to be when he goes to college in the continent, in California, later New York, and in Boston. So, but with True Dreams, we get to see Obama's um, fascination with his family history. He goes into a deep dive, reading about the Kenyan Luo people. He travels there twice, meets many of his family, meets his grandmother, and he kind of tries to navigate this space without necessarily being an insider to the African space that he's fascinated with. So he has a limited connection to Kenya, is the point. And in some cases, even limited connection to American Blackness. His upbringing is one of an upper middle class white family that has privileges that he enjoys in some state cases, but also doesn't enjoy in some, at other times. His father keeps on writing him letters until the point he dies. And at first, they will exchange and he'll respond back. But as he gets older, he realizes he wasn't present. His father wasn't present in his life. So he doesn't answer these letters until his father dies in 1982. And an awakening happened that pushes him to go and seek his family history, heritage in Kenya. I'm going to talk a little bit about what he writes, which is my identity might begin with the fact of my race, but it couldn't end there. At least that's what I chose to believe. That's what he writes in page 11 of Dreams. So one of a scholar called Daniel Stein in 2011 described dreams as an attempt to arrive at a state of functional Blackness, which Obama inhabits, and it's kind of the navigating of Blackness as a fodder for propelling yourself and narrative without being imbued with the excesses and the damages and psychological effects of what Blackness constitutes in reality. So the story has a very Black American feel without necessarily being wholly Black American in other cases. So that's kind of the first brother that we talk about. The other one that I wanted to talk about was Mark Obama, whose book on Obama's journey um, delves deeper into the life of Barack Obama Sr. in Kenya. So unlike the president, Mark lives with his father growing up and has a much more close, close-up relationship with him, which is interesting to examine. So who is Mark Obama? Mark goes by the last name DeSancho, so he doesn't go with the last name Obama. And he picks the name Obama later on after the president had been after his brother had been elected president. Mark's mother is Ruth, an American Jew from Boston who meets Barack Obama Sr. While he was a student at Harvard University, and Barack Obama Sr. suddenly decides to return back to Kenya after his master's degree. I guess he couldn't complete his PhD, so he decided to go back midway, and Ruth decides to join him in a new country that was just forming right after independence. And Barack Obama was just joined the Kenyan community as the new urban American educated upper middle class people working for the finance ministry as an economist. In At first things go very well, and it seems like a happy life, but soon Barack Obama's life is hijacked by forces of post-colonial societies, which are around ethnicity, negative ethnicity, that makes him uncomfortable to rise politically because he belonged to a rival ethnic group called Luo, and Kenya at the time was dominated by the Kikuyu, whose leader was the president, Jomo Kenyatta, and Barack Obama is not promoted. He struggled with alcoholism and bankruptcy, and he struggled as he sees other people who he was more smart compared to rise through the ranks while he's left behind. So, amidst these challenges that were partly his choices, but also partly structural, uh, Mark indicates a story of struggle, of pain, of violence, abuse, alcoholism, and also a story of anti-Blackness. And he's not really in love with his Kenyan identity. He has a lot of resentment toward his father and partly jealousy towards his other more successful brother, the president. He struggled with belonging as a mixed race person in a Kenyan society in which mixed raceness did not give you enough rootedness in a society that was either black or white within the colonial space. He also struggled with the Kenyan culture at large. He doesn't really find it fitting for how he wanted to be seen. And as soon as he's 18, he leaves, even though he attended some of the most prestigious schools, leaves Kenya to join Brown University, then Stanford, and Emory University in Atlanta, all good schools. So just like his brother, he's very competent and very smart, but also privileged. He doesn't talk much about that, but as you read it, you realize he's privileged too, compared to his other brothers that we will talk about here. So in his case, we see an admiration for his brother, but a dislike for his family. And this admiration kind of comes off as sometimes conflictious. They're meeting in Nairobi while a college student at Brown is one that he describes in great detail, including sweats in Obama's face. It's very detailed writing and descriptive. But he talks about Obama admiring his father and looking for something that wasn't existing from his dead father, while Mark talks about him as a brute, animalistic, and violent behavior, and has no desire to connect with the larger Obama family, which he eventually does as the president gained political success and recasted himself as an Obama rather than an DeSancho, the stepfather's name that he had taken. So Mark is a complicated figure. He says that uh, he was a black Mzungu. Mzungu is a Caucasian in Swahili. He was black. I was black to whites, yet white to all blacks, with no middle ground. Unable to bond with my black brothers, I quickly adopted the culture of my white mother and more polite Caucasian family. So in other words, Mark is choosing whiteness and he's choosing convenience. He's associating his black family with violence and with his father. And tries, makes no effort to speak the language or to identify with the Kenyan cause or black people in general, even as he was a student in the United States. It's important to note that Mark is a Kenyan citizen, even as he is also an American. So in other words, he is the one who was a little more rooted compared to the president. in terms of geography. The other brother I wanted to talk about is Malik. And Malik Obama is the infamous brother. He is the firstborn, and he's born to Obama's senior's first wife, Kezia Obama, whom he was married to before he came to Hawaii to study. And he issued a divorce in absentia. So he was, and this relationship with the president is kind of love and hate. At first, when they meet in the United States, they have in the 80s they develop a bond, and Barack Obama really looked up to him as a big brother and asked him anything Kenyan. He was happy to share. They seemed to be enjoying each other's company, and Malik was even the first, the best man in Obama's um, wedding with Michelle. But Malik has a complex personality. He has an exaggerated sense of African nationalism, and he is a practicing Muslim. And it wasn't surprising that at time his presence within the political um, climate in America, which is very punishing, was not necessary. And Malik failed to read that. And because he failed to read what the president had to do, he had high expectation on his brother that couldn't be met. Malik also failed to realize that his brother wasn't an African in the true sense. He was an American born and raised here. He also didn't realize that he and his brother lived different realities uh, that couldn't be reconciled at time, even with blood. So he has kind of like a love-hate relationship with his brother, one that is playing out in the political scene, even now as we see it, him backing Donald Trump over and calling his brother snake and all sort of things. So Malik's story in the book is very revealing about his experiences living with his father under Mark's mom. And he says initially it was great, but later on, Mark's mom was abusive and his father was abusive. And he doesn't call it racism, but he did come close to indicating that his life was racialized, in which preferences was given to Mark and his other brother who died later on. And his other brother rebelled, eventually died in a car accident, in a motorcycle accident, while living in exile, self-imposed exile with Malik, who at the time was a young adult. So there is a lot of trauma in Malik's narrative about the family, but there's also a lot of pride in the family name and a lot of exaggeration about his father's achievement and an attempt to correct Sally Jacobs' reportage of the father's life. So the usefulness of Malik's account is that it gives us the Kenyan version of the Obama family and their relationship and their experience of Blackness in a colonial order, which is different from the mixed race brothers, as told from a half Jewish brother and a half Irish brother, whose account is one of upper middle class in America and in Kenya. The other brother, so here's a picture of Malik and his brother in the happier times, and later on, Malik as a grown man living in Kenya after failed political attempts. So here, Malik, we see a lot of jealousy and anger, but we don't know the full details. And I'm not yet finished reading the book, but I think it's an interesting book to know about these family dynamics that are playing out. The last brother I wanted to talk about is George Obama. It's another less known brother, but often regarded as the last born or the old man, the black Barack Senior. He was born and raised in Kenya to the father's last girlfriend or wife. It's not clear if he actually did marry the mother. And his father died before he was born. He does have a striking resemblance to the president, except for his skin color. Um, and he describes meeting the president only briefly in the 90s or late 80s. And because of some family squabbles that were going on, they were not able to develop a relationship. However, his book is very telling about his experience. I think I really liked his book because it's very much uh, focused on the everyday lives of Kenyan people, and he describes living in the slums, going to prison, coming out, starting a foundation, using the name Obama and his intelligence and business savviness in the streets. In the book, also indicates a rather telling account of how he was raised by a stepdad who was a French uh, multinational corporation worker in Nairobi, and initially they lived a very good life in the west side of Nairobi, so the upper class side of Nairobi. And then the Frenchman left his mom, and his mother left for Korea, I think, for a job, and his life kind of degenerated. The absence of a father figure in his family drove him down to crime and disorder and drug use. So he's kind of like the Daily Mail called him the slum dog brother of the president, and the Republican politician used him to bash Obama as projecting a family-friendly picture while abandoning some members of his family. Story is rather tragic, but it does tell a lot more about the complexities of fatherlessness in a society that is structured around patriarchy. It also does tell us how family feuds are not unique and they could be present in every kind of family all over the world. So, in general, what I find about these stories is that there is an element of collective trauma that is embedded in all of them that is painful to read, but also fascinating to read about. Um, the family's narrative is also a side of history about of blackness, not just about Kenya, but also about how complex issues of identities are, and families' bringings can be uh, impactful in people's lives, even as they are successful. Perhaps you want to ask if Malik was born in America, will he be rose to be president? Or if Obama was born in Kenya, will he be able to rise to be a Kenyan president? What's the limit of intelligence? Or how much agency do people have out of their geography? But generally, it does connect the Kenyan experience to um, the American experience about race and identity. So I think that the stories of the Obama are useful in many regards and instructive about identity and issues about race. And they have intergenerational effect that we are still feeling today, but they are also stories about hope because anybody can rise and still be president, regardless of the circumstances that they come from. Thank you for watching, and I believe you enjoyed this. And be sure to subscribe and like our video for more. Look out. Thank you. Bye bye.